An Apache woman hit a wounded cowboy. What grew between them was deadly. Nayeli, an Apache woman in her late 20s, moved quietly through the tall grasses that swayed in the evening breeze. Her dark hair, tied back in a simple braid, reflected the last golden rays of sunlight. She had grown up learning to survive in this unforgiving land. Every rustle of wind, every distant cry of an animal, every subtle movement in the shadows was a signal she had learned to read from birth. The desert and the mountains were her home, and she knew them like the lines on her hands. That evening, she was returning from gathering medicinal herbs along a narrow canyon path. Her basket was half full, the strong scent of sage and sweet grass filling the air around her. She hummed softly to herself, a tune her grandmother had taught her, when a sudden, faint sound made her freeze. It was not the sound of wind or the call of a bird. It was a soft, desperate groan. Nayeli's sharp eyes scanned the area, and she caught a glimpse of a figure lying against a rock farther down the path. Cautiously, she approached, moving silently over the rocky terrain. As she drew closer, she saw a man sprawled on the ground, his clothes torn and stained with blood. His face was pale, his eyes half closed, and a deep gash ran across his shoulder. He was a cowboy, by the look of his hat and boots, far from the Apache settlements he had stumbled into. Nayeli's instincts told her to turn away. Cowboys were not friends of her people. Many had caused pain and destruction to her tribe. But something in the way he lay there, so weak and vulnerable, stirred her compassion. She knelt beside him, her hands hovering over the wound as she assessed the danger. He was alive, but only just. A bullet had grazed him in a firefight, she guessed, and he had been left to die in the wilderness. The thought made her heart tighten. She knew the forested canyon well, and there were hidden caves and natural shelters where she could bring him to safety, but it would be risky. If her tribe discovered she had a stranger, especially a cowboy, there could be trouble. Still, Nayeli made her choice. Carefully, she leaned down and whispered, "You will be safe with me." "Stay still." The man groaned again, his lips parting slightly, but he did not respond with words. He seemed too weak, too shocked by pain to speak. Nayeli's strong hands worked quickly. She tore a strip from her scarf and wrapped it around his shoulder to slow the bleeding. She scanned the horizon, listening for any signs of danger. The desert was quiet, save for the distant call of a hawk and the soft whisper of the wind through the rocks. With a deep breath, she lifted him gently, draping his arm over her shoulder. His weight was heavy, and his body sagged with exhaustion, but she had learned strength from her father and brothers. Step by careful step, she guided him down the rocky slope toward a hidden cave she knew well. It was a small opening, almost invisible from the main path, shaded by a cluster of cacti and scrub brush. Inside, the cave widened into a cool, dark space that smelled faintly of earth and herbs. Nayeli laid him down on a bed of dried grass and blankets she had stored for cold nights. She moved quickly, fetching water from a small leather pouch and dabbing at the bloodstains with care. His breathing was shallow but steady, and she allowed herself a small sigh of relief. "You're going to live," she said softly. "I will see to that." She worked through the night, cleaning the wound and applying a poultice made from herbs to prevent infection. The man, still unconscious, murmured occasionally in his sleep, words she could not understand. Nayeli listened carefully, her mind alert to every sound. The desert could be dangerous at night, and a wounded man would attract attention if left outside. She made a fire in a small, sheltered corner of the cave, careful that the smoke did not escape too far, and kept watch while the night sky shifted from deep blue to black, studded with countless stars. As dawn approached, she sat beside him, watching the sunlight begin to touch the edges of the canyon. She studied his face, the stubble on his chin, the tense lines of pain, and the quiet vulnerability he had tried to hide. There was something human about him, despite the danger he represented. Nayeli had always been cautious of outsiders, especially cowboys, but she could not ignore the trust he had placed in her by simply surviving until she found him. For hours she waited, tending to the fire, keeping her senses alert to any sound. The desert was waking, the wind picking up, birds calling to one another from the cliffs. Slowly he began to stir. His eyelids fluttered open, and for a moment he looked around in confusion, taking in the dim light of the cave and the figure watching him. Naeli offered a small smile. "You are safe now," she repeated. "I am Naeli. You must be very hurt." He tried to speak, but only a weak whisper escaped his lips. Naeli leaned closer, listening intently. "Don't try to move yet," she cautioned gently. "The wound is deep. Rest. You have to regain your strength before you move again." The cowboy's eyes held a mixture of gratitude and suspicion. He was clearly trying to remember how he had ended up here, piecing together the fragments of memory through pain and fear. Naeli remained patient, understanding that trust was not given lightly, especially between a native woman and a stranger who represented a world that had often caused harm to her people. She spoke softly, telling him stories of the canyon, of the animals that roamed it, and of the plants she had gathered that could heal wounds. Her voice was calm, steady, and rhythmic, helping to soothe the pain that racked his body. Hours passed, and he began to relax under her care. Naeli continued her work, occasionally leaving him to gather fresh water and more herbs from the canyon. She moved with purpose, blending her survival skills with a careful attention to his needs. She knew that the longer he stayed hidden and safe, the more his body would heal, and the more likely he could return to the outside world without bringing danger to her people. By the end of the first day, a quiet understanding had formed between them. Naeli had saved his life, and he had begun to recognize her skill, her courage, and the silent strength she carried. There was no need for words beyond simple acknowledgments. In the vast, empty desert amid cliffs and hidden caves, a fragile connection had begun, born of necessity, survival, and the shared recognition of human vulnerability. As the sun set again, painting the canyon in shades of red and gold, Naeli settled near the cave entrance, keeping a watchful eye. She knew the next days would be dangerous, that outsiders might come searching, or that her own people could question her decisions. Yet in that moment, she allowed herself a small measure of hope. Somehow, against the odds, she had found herself responsible for a life that seemed intertwined with hers in ways she could not yet understand. The desert around them was quiet once more, the stars slowly appearing in the sky, one by one. Naeli glanced at the cowboy, still resting, and felt a strange mix of worry and resolve. She had made a choice, and now she would see it through. She did not yet know what the future held for them, only that tonight, in the shadow of the mesas, a bond had begun. A bond that would shape the days to come in ways neither of them could predict. The days passed slowly in the hidden cave. Naeli stayed close to the cowboy, who introduced himself as Thomas once he could speak more clearly. His voice was hoarse, each word laboring through pain and fatigue. But it was enough for Naeli to understand that he had been traveling across the territory, moving cattle and supplies for a rancher far to the east. His life had always been on the move, full of danger and hard work, but he had never imagined it would end with him lying wounded and alone in the desert. For Naeli, caring for Thomas became more than a duty. It was a quiet rhythm that filled her days. She moved with precision, tending to his wounds, gathering fresh water from a nearby stream and cooking simple meals over a small fire. She had learned from her grandmother how to use the plants around her, sage to calm pain, chamomile to soothe, and a strong clay paste to help stop bleeding. Thomas watched her carefully, sometimes offering thanks, sometimes remaining silent, lost in thought. Though he was recovering physically, Thomas struggled with restlessness. The cave, though safe, felt confining. He tried to sit up one morning, groaning as pain shot through his shoulder. Naeli placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Not yet," she said softly. Your body is weak. You need to regain strength before you move again. The desert can be unforgiving if you try to leave too soon." Thomas nodded, though frustration lingered in his eyes. He was used to being independent, used to being the one who provided and protected. To lie helpless in a stranger's care challenged his pride. But Nayeli's calm determination and quiet confidence had begun to earn his respect. He began to notice the way she moved with the land, how she could find water even in dry soil, how she knew which plants could heal and which could harm. Her skills were remarkable, and slowly he began to trust her. Their days settled into a routine. Nayeli would rise before the sun, gathering herbs and preparing simple meals, while Thomas rested. As he grew stronger, he would join her in small tasks, carrying water, gathering firewood, or helping to tend a small garden of wild herbs Nayeli had cultivated near the cave. They spoke little at first, the silence between them filled with the sounds of the desert, the whisper of wind, the distant call of hawks, and the occasional rustle of a lizard in the brush. But over time, words began to flow. Thomas told stories of life on the ranch, of wide open fields, cattle drives, and the harsh realities of frontier life. Nayeli listened, fascinated by a world so different from her own. In turn, she shared stories of her people, how the Apache had lived for generations, their deep connection to the land, and the lessons she had learned from her grandmother. She spoke of survival, of respect for nature, and of the strength found in patience and observation. Through these stories, they began to understand each other. Trust grew, carefully and quietly, like a seed pushing through the soil toward sunlight. Thomas began to see Nayeli not just as a stranger who had saved his life, but as a guide, a teacher, and a companion. Nayeli, in turn, saw Thomas as someone brave enough to face the wilderness and humble enough to accept help. Their connection, though still unspoken in its depth, became undeniable. Yet the desert outside remained dangerous. Nayeli never let her guard down. She kept watch over the cave entrance, especially at night, and taught Thomas how to recognize signs of animals or humans nearby. "The desert is alive," she explained one evening, pointing to tracks in the sand. "Every footprint, every broken branch tells a story. You must read it carefully or it can cost you your life." Thomas listened, absorbing every lesson, realizing that survival here required more than strength. It required patience, awareness, and respect for the land. Despite the growing closeness between them, Nayeli remained cautious. She could feel the stirrings of something more in her heart, but she knew that a bond between an Apache woman and a cowboy was complicated, even dangerous. Both their lives were tied to worlds often in conflict. She did not yet fully trust what might happen if outsiders discovered him here, and she wondered how her own people would react. Still, in the quiet moments, when Thomas smiled weakly at her, or when they shared a small meal by the fire, she felt the warmth of companionship and perhaps the first flicker of something deeper. Thomas, too, began to notice. He admired Nayeli's resilience and the gentle authority with which she commanded the cave and the surrounding land. He found himself watching her movements with an intensity he had never known, noticing the grace in her steps, the sharpness in her gaze, and the kindness in her hands. He knew he was lucky to be alive, and that luck was tied directly to this woman who had chosen to help him despite the risks. Their quiet days were sometimes interrupted by tension. Thomas occasionally tried to speak of the outside world, friends, family, or work that awaited him, but Nayeli would gently redirect him. "You must live first," she said once, pressing a cool cloth to his brow. "The rest can wait until you are strong enough." He realized she was right. The desert did not forgive weakness, and every day spent recovering in her care strengthened not just his body but his understanding of patience and trust. One afternoon, as the sun climbed high, Nayeli led Thomas to a small hidden spring she had discovered years before. The water was clear and cool, a rare treasure in the arid land. She showed him how to filter it through sand and stone and how to test for safety. He marveled at her knowledge, realizing that she was not just surviving, she was thriving, mastering the desert in ways he could not. As they drank from the spring, the sunlight catching in the canyon, he felt a sense of peace he had not known in months. Evenings brought their quiet companionship by the fire. Nayeli would braid herbs into small bundles to dry, and Thomas would try to help, fumbling awkwardly but with earnest effort. Sometimes they laughed at his clumsiness, and at other times they simply sat in silence, watching the stars emerge one by one. Each night, the bond between them grew, subtle but undeniable. It was a bond forged from shared survival, trust, and the understanding that in this harsh land, they were stronger together than apart. But beneath the calm, the world outside the cave remained a threat. Nayeli had heard distant voices on the wind, maybe cowboys searching for Thomas, or other outsiders curious about the cave hidden in the cliffs. She knew that their safety was temporary, and that eventually Thomas would have to face the world beyond her protection. The thought brought a shadow of worry to her heart, yet she pushed it aside, focusing on the present, on teaching him, caring for him, and building a connection that could carry them through whatever challenges lay ahead. As Thomas healed, he began to understand the depth of Nayeli's skill. She taught him how to move silently through the brush, how to track animals and humans alike, and how to respect the land as both a source of life and a place of danger. He learned to appreciate her intuition, her ability to sense threats before they appeared, and her calm determination in the face of uncertainty. In turn, he shared his knowledge of the outside world, telling her about the towns, the ranches, and the people who depended on cattle and trade for survival. Their conversations bridged the gap between their two worlds, creating a space where understanding, respect, and cautious curiosity could grow. By the end of the second week, Thomas was strong enough to walk short distances with Nayeli, though he still needed her guidance. The bond between them had shifted. It was no longer just survival, but companionship and respect. Each day spent together strengthened not just their bodies, but their understanding of each other's worlds. They were learning to trust, to rely on one another, and, without realizing it, to care in a way that went beyond gratitude. As the sun set on another quiet evening, painting the canyon in soft oranges and purples, Nayeli and Thomas sat together near the fire. She handed him a small piece of roasted corn, and he smiled, a genuine expression of warmth and appreciation. "I don't know what I would have done without you," he said quietly. Nayeli only nodded, understanding more than he could imagine. Words were not always necessary here. The desert had taught them both to observe, to act, and to survive, and in that shared rhythm, something rare and fragile was growing. The desert around them was vast and silent, but inside the cave, a connection had begun to form. Trust, respect, and a quiet affection tied them together, stronger than either had anticipated. And though the outside world remained unpredictable and dangerous, for the first time in weeks, both Nayeli and Thomas felt a sense of hope. They were alive. They were together. And in the heart of the unforgiving desert, that was enough to begin something new, a bond that could withstand challenges yet unseen. The days of calm and quiet in the canyon were coming to an end. Nayeli could feel it in the wind. The desert, usually a comforting companion, now seemed watchful and tense. Every rustle in the grasses, every distant crack of a branch, made her pulse quicken. She knew that hiding a wounded outsider in Apache territory was a dangerous task. Her people were protective of the land, and outsiders, especially cowboys, were often unwelcome. It was not just the land she had to think about, but the people who watched over it, ensuring that strangers did not disrupt the fragile balance of survival. Thomas had grown stronger over the past 2 weeks. His wound was healing, and he could walk longer distances with Nayeli's support. But his presence in the canyon was no secret from the eyes of the wild. He sometimes noticed small footprints that were not theirs, faint traces in the sand that could belong to scouts, wandering cowboys, or even hostile bandits. He wanted to leave, to return to the towns and ranches he knew, but Nayeli insisted he remain. "Not yet," she said firmly one morning. "You are safer here. The desert gives you strength, and I will teach you more before you face the world outside." At first, Thomas chafed at her restrictions. He was used to being independent, to deciding his own path. The desert had humbled him, however, showing him that survival depended not only on skill but on caution and patience. He began to watch Nayeli more closely, noticing how she read the land. Her senses were attuned to the faintest movements, the bend of a tree branch, the scent of smoke far in the distance, or the sudden silence of birds that signaled danger. Her awareness was more than survival. It was instinct, honed by years of living in harmony with the harsh environment. One afternoon, as the sun reached its highest point and the desert radiated heat, Nayeli led Thomas to a narrow ridge overlooking the canyon below. She pointed to distant tracks in the sand. "See those?" she asked. "Someone has been moving this way, perhaps looking for you." Thomas squinted at the faint marks. "Cowboys?" he asked, his voice tense. "Perhaps," Nayeli replied, "or travelers, but we cannot take chances. You must remain hidden until I know it is safe." The thought of outsiders coming so close made Thomas uneasy. He realized that the desert, which had once seemed vast and protective, was also a place of constant observation. Every hill and canyon could hide a watchful eye. He trusted Nayeli completely, but the danger reminded him that the bond they had formed, however strong, did not make them invincible. That night, they reinforced the cave's entrance. Nayeli taught Thomas how to cover their tracks, how to create false paths, and how to use the natural landscape to conceal their movements. Thomas struggled at first, but under Nayeli's patient guidance, he began to understand the subtle art of hiding in plain sight. "By the firelight," she explained, "the desert is our ally if we respect it. Every plant, every rock, every shadow can protect us if we know how to use them." Days turned into a tense routine of vigilance and preparation. Thomas learned quickly, his body recovering and his mind sharpening with each lesson. He began to see Nayeli not just as a caregiver or guide, but as a strategist, someone whose knowledge of the land and people was unmatched. He realized that she had been tested by this environment her entire life, surviving challenges he could not have imagined. Despite the tension, their companionship deepened. There were quiet moments when they shared meals, watched the sun rise and set, or simply sat in silence, letting the world around them fill the space. Thomas spoke more of his past, of his family, and of life on the ranch. Nayeli listened, not just to the words but to the feelings behind them. She could see his fears, hopes, and regrets, and she began to feel a protective warmth toward him that went beyond responsibility. But the desert had its own rhythm, and it would not wait for their trust to grow. One evening, as shadows lengthened across the canyon, Nayeli noticed unusual movements in the distance. She crouched low on a ledge, her eyes scanning the horizon. Thomas followed her silently, his heart pounding. Two figures were moving cautiously through the brush below. Nayeli's instincts screamed that they were not friendly. "They are coming closer," she whispered. "We must be ready." Thomas nodded, realizing that their calm days were over. Nayeli instructed him to stay behind a rock while she observed the intruders. Her movements were fluid, practiced, and precise. She read the terrain like a map, understanding where to hide, how to stay silent, and when to act. The figures paused, unaware of the presence watching them from above. Nayeli considered her options. A direct confrontation would be risky, but letting them pass unchecked could lead to danger for both of them. As the intruders approached the cave, Nayeli signaled Thomas to stay completely still. She moved silently along the edge, using shadows and rocks to remain unseen. Her eyes narrowed as she assessed the situation. The intruders were looking for something or someone. Nayeli's mind raced. She realized they might have heard of a wounded cowboy in the area. Her pulse quickened, but she did not show fear. Every instinct she had honed in the wilderness guided her. Thomas watched in awe. He had heard of Apache women being skilled warriors, but seeing Nayeli in action was different. Her focus, calmness, and precision were remarkable. He realized how much he still had to learn about survival and the ways of the land. More importantly, he understood that Nayeli's strength was not just physical but mental, a combination of knowledge, instinct, and courage. The intruders passed near the cave entrance, unaware of their presence. Nayeli waited until they moved out of sight, then signaled Thomas to follow her back inside. "They are gone for now," she said quietly, "but this is a warning. The world outside is not safe, and we must be vigilant." Over the next few days, the tension grew. Nayeli and Thomas could no longer move freely around the canyon. Every trip to the spring, every gathering of herbs required careful planning. They developed signals and routines, learning to communicate silently and anticipate each other's needs. Thomas, who had once been impatient and restless, began to admire Nayeli's foresight and preparation. He realized that survival was not just about strength, but about knowledge, strategy, and respect for the land and its people. Yet, despite the danger, moments of human connection continued to grow. Thomas noticed the small things, the way Nayeli smiled when she found a rare herb, the gentle tone of her voice when speaking to him, the way she moved with confidence and grace. Nayeli, too, found herself observing Thomas differently. She saw not just the cowboy he once was, but the man beneath, the one who had survived hardship, who was learning humility, and who was beginning to understand the desert in a way he never had before. Their bond deepened, though neither spoke openly of it. There was a quiet tension, a sense that their feelings were growing beyond friendship or trust, but the danger around them kept them cautious. Nayeli reminded herself that even a small mistake could bring disaster. Thomas, aware of the delicate balance, focused on learning and surviving, yet he could not ignore the pull he felt toward her. One afternoon, a sudden storm rolled over the mesas. The wind howled, carrying dust and debris across the canyon, while thunder rumbled in the distance. Nayeli and Thomas huddled inside the cave, the storm forcing them closer together. Rain splattered against the rocks, and lightning illuminated the canyon in brief flashes. Thomas reached out to steady Nayeli as she adjusted a loose bundle of firewood. Their hands touched, and for a moment both were aware of the connection that had grown between them. It was fleeting but undeniable, a silent acknowledgement that, despite the danger, something important was beginning. As the storm passed and the canyon returned to its quiet state, Nayeli and Thomas emerged to assess the damage. The desert had been washed clean in places, tracks erased, but new dangers might also arrive with the water. Yet despite the constant threats, there was a sense of resilience between them. They had faced danger together, learned from each other, and survived. Each challenge made their bond stronger. Each shared moment deepened their understanding of one another. The desert was teaching them both lessons that could not be found in towns or ranches. Trust, patience, courage, and respect were the currency of survival here. Nayeli had guided Thomas through these lessons, and he had learned quickly, gaining not only physical strength but a sharper mind. Their connection, born of necessity and nurtured by shared experience, had become something neither could ignore. As the sun set over the canyon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Nayeli and Thomas sat together near the fire. They were no longer just survivor and caretaker. They were companions, allies, and perhaps, quietly, something more. The desert had brought them together, and the dangers that surrounded them had forged a bond that neither distance nor threat could easily break. Yet, in the back of Nayeli's mind, she knew the tension was far from over. Outsiders were still near. The world outside was unpredictable, and every choice could have consequences. But for now, in this quiet moment, they could rest, knowing that together, they had faced the first true tests of survival and had grown stronger because of it. The tension in the canyon had been building for days, a quiet pressure that neither Nayeli nor Thomas could ignore. The desert, once a place of solitude and learning, now felt like a trap. Every movement, every sound, carried the possibility of danger. Nayeli had grown even more alert, her eyes scanning the horizon constantly, her mind calculating every risk. Thomas, stronger now and more confident in his abilities, felt the weight of the threats pressing in around them. Their bond had grown, but the world outside remained unpredictable, and the past they each carried threatened to catch up with them. One morning, Nayeli noticed fresh tracks leading toward the cave. Her instincts told her immediately that these were not random wanderers. The footprints were deep, heavy, and deliberate. Someone was coming and they were looking for them. Nayeli motioned for Thomas to stay back as she crept to a higher vantage point, observing the movement through a natural gap in the rocks. Two men, armed and cautious, moved slowly across the desert floor, scanning the land as if searching for a prize. Nayeli's heart sank. The danger they represented was real. "They've found the trail," she whispered, returning to Thomas. "We cannot stay here much longer. We have to be ready to move and to defend ourselves if necessary." Thomas felt a mix of fear and resolve. He had survived the desert's harshness, learned to read its signs, and trusted Nayeli with his life. Now, the lessons she had taught him would be tested. They gathered supplies quickly but silently, packing water, herbs, and essentials while Nayeli instructed him on how to move without leaving traces. Every step, every action was calculated. The desert demanded perfection in such moments, and Nayeli's expertise guided them. As they prepared, Thomas tried to speak. "Nayeli, what happens if they find us?" She looked at him, her dark eyes steady and unwavering. "Then we do what we must. The desert teaches, but it also protects those who respect it. Trust what you have learned, trust me." They left the cave at first light, moving through narrow canyons and rocky ridges. The terrain was difficult, but Nayeli knew every hidden path, every shadow where they could pause and remain unseen. Thomas followed closely, relying on her guidance. The sun climbed higher, casting sharp light and deep shadows, making every decision critical. One misstep could reveal them to their pursuers. By midday, they reached a small overhang that offered a view of the canyon floor below. From this vantage point, they could see the two men moving cautiously, searching for tracks, their horses grazing nearby. Nayeli crouched low, her mind racing. "They are persistent," she said. "We cannot outrun them forever. We have to prepare for what may come." Thomas felt a sudden chill despite the desert heat. He had faced danger before, but nothing like this. His life had been about work, travel, and routine, but now survival depended on quick thinking, trust, and action. He looked at Nayeli, seeing the calm strength she carried, and knew that fear alone would not help them. They needed a plan. As they moved to a safer position, Nayeli explained her strategy. They would use the terrain to their advantage, drawing the intruders into narrow paths where movement was restricted. Rocks, ledges, and natural cover would give them the upper hand. She assigned Thomas a position to observe and signal, while she took the lead in positioning themselves strategically. Every instruction was precise, reflecting the countless lessons she had learned from the desert and from living among her people. Hours passed, tension thick in the air. The intruders were methodical, searching every path, every likely hiding spot. Nayeli's mind never rested, calculating the best moment to act, anticipating their movements, and ensuring that Thomas remained safe. The desert around them seemed alive, every breeze carrying the potential for discovery, every shadow a possible threat. Finally, the intruders reached a point where the terrain funneled them into a narrow canyon. Nayeli signaled Thomas to stay low, silent, and ready. She moved to a concealed ledge, watching as the two men carefully advanced. Her heart pounded, but her focus was unshakable. This was the moment where all their preparation, trust, and skills would be tested. Suddenly, one of the men noticed a small disturbance in the sand, a faint trace of their passage. He signaled to his companion, who tightened his grip on his weapon. Nayeli's eyes flicked to Thomas. He nodded, understanding that they might have to defend themselves. She whispered, "Stay calm. Follow my lead." The two intruders moved closer, unaware of the hidden pair above them. Nayeli waited for the precise moment, then caused a small rock slide from the ledge above, startling the men and forcing them to scatter. The sudden noise and movement created confusion, giving Nayeli and Thomas the advantage. They stayed hidden, observing how the intruders tried to regroup. The canyon's twists and shadows worked in their favor, allowing them to remain unseen while the intruders struggled to find the source of the disturbance. As the day wore on, the intruders became more aggressive, realizing they were being outmaneuvered. Nayeli's mind raced. She could lead them further into the canyon, using narrow paths and steep ridges to control their movements. Thomas watched, learning how her strategy combined patience, observation, and careful timing. Every choice she made was a balance between risk and reward. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the canyon. Nayeli knew that nightfall would offer them a chance to escape undetected. She signaled Thomas to follow her as they carefully moved to another hidden path. Their movements were silent, deliberate, and precise. The intruders, frustrated and exhausted, had no idea they had been outwitted. Once they reached a safe overhang, Nayeli allowed herself a moment to breathe. Thomas looked at her, awe and admiration in his eyes. "I don't know how you do it," he said quietly. "I've never seen anyone so calm in the face of danger." Nayeli smiled faintly, though her mind was still alert. "The desert teaches you," she replied. "It does not forgive mistakes, and it does not favor the unprepared. We survive by listening, observing, and acting when the moment is right." That night, they camped in a small cave hidden among rocks. The intruders had not followed them, but the threat remained. Nayeli kept watch while Thomas rested, realizing that their bond had grown stronger through the shared danger. They had faced real threats together, and each had come to rely on the other's courage, skill, and judgment. In the quiet of the night, Thomas reflected on the days he had spent in the canyon. He had learned humility, patience, and the value of trust. Nayeli had shown him that strength was not just physical, it was mental, emotional, and spiritual. And though he had entered the desert as a wounded outsider, he now felt a deep respect for the woman who had saved him, guided him, and shared her knowledge so freely. Nayeli, too, felt the bond that had grown between them. She had saved his life, yes, but she had also come to care for him in ways that surprised her. There was a quiet affection, a protective instinct, and a recognition that their connection was rare and meaningful. Yet she reminded herself that danger was still present. The desert, the world outside, and the complexities of their lives meant that trust and connection were always balanced with caution. In the following days, they continued to move carefully through the canyon, always alert, always aware of the intruders who might return. Nayeli taught Thomas more advanced survival skills, how to find hidden water sources, how to recognize subtle changes in the wind, and how to track others without being seen. Each lesson strengthened Thomas's confidence and deepened his appreciation for Nayeli's wisdom. But the danger was not the only challenge. Their growing feelings for each other added a new layer of complexity. Thomas found himself watching Nayeli more closely, noticing the smallest gestures, the way her eyes lit up when she found a rare herb, or the quiet determination in her movements. Nayeli, aware of the connection, struggled with her own emotions. The desert had brought them together, but it had also placed them in a world where love could be dangerous, and attachments could lead to vulnerability. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the cliffs and the canyon was bathed in golden light, they shared a quiet meal. Thomas handed Nayeli a piece of roasted corn, their hands brushing for a moment. Neither spoke, but both felt the unspoken acknowledgement of the bond that had formed. In the midst of danger, uncertainty, and survival, they had found a connection that neither could ignore. Yet, as they settled in for the night, Nayeli's mind remained alert. The intruders were still out there, and the desert had more lessons yet to teach. She knew that their greatest challenges were not behind them but ahead. And as Thomas drifted to sleep, she vowed silently to protect him, to guide him, and to face whatever came with courage, wisdom, and the strength of the bond they had forged. The desert was harsh and unpredictable, but it had also brought them together. And in that harshness, in the constant tests of survival, they had discovered a connection that was powerful, fragile, and impossible to ignore. The coming days would demand every skill, every ounce of courage, and every measure of trust they had. But for now, in the quiet of the canyon night, they could rest, aware that the world outside was dangerous, yet certain that together they could face it. The desert morning was quiet, almost unnaturally so. Nayeli awoke before the sun, as she always did, listening to the soft rustle of the canyon wind and the distant cry of a hawk. Thomas was still asleep, exhausted from the tension and the long days of survival. Nayeli felt a mix of relief and worry. Relief because they had survived another day, and worry because the danger outside the canyon had not disappeared. It had only grown sharper. She watched him for a moment, noticing the faint shadow of stubble on his face and the way his chest rose and fell steadily with each breath. He had come a long way since the day she found him wounded. His body was stronger, his movements more confident, and his mind sharper. But more than that, she could see a change in him, an awareness of the land, a respect for its power, and a bond with her that neither had fully admitted but both felt deeply. Nayeli rose quietly and began preparing a small breakfast. She needed to keep Thomas nourished, for they might have to move at any moment. The desert could be unpredictable, and the intruders from days before were still a threat. She moved with her usual precision, grinding corn into meal, fetching water from the hidden spring, and arranging a small fire in a sheltered alcove. Each movement was deliberate, each decision calculated for efficiency and safety. When Thomas awoke, the first thing he noticed was Nayeli's calm focus. She worked silently, yet with purpose, a reminder of her strength and resilience. He stood slowly, stretching his muscles, and joined her in preparing the morning meal. They worked together, moving with a rhythm that had developed over weeks of shared survival. The connection between them was palpable, yet unspoken, carried in gestures, shared glances, and the quiet understanding that they relied on each other completely. As they ate, Nayeli scanned the horizon. The canyon below was still, the paths they had traveled empty, but she knew better than to trust in appearances alone. Danger had a way of appearing when least expected, and she could sense it in the subtle changes of wind, the movement of dust, and the absence of birds. Thomas noticed the tension in her posture, the way her eyes flicked from shadow to shadow. He realized that the desert had taught her to read the world with a precision he had only begun to understand. Suddenly, a distant shout echoed through the canyon, sharp and urgent. Nayeli's body tensed instantly, every muscle coiling in response. Thomas reacted quickly, moving beside her, ready to follow her lead. The intruders had returned, bolder this time, and their intent was clear. Nayeli whispered a quick instruction, pointing toward a narrow path that would give them cover. They moved silently, keeping low, every step measured and careful. The intruders were close now, their voices carrying clearly through the dry air. Nayeli assessed the terrain, calculating their options. They could flee deeper into the canyon, but the paths were limited and unfamiliar to Thomas. They could confront the men directly, but they were outnumbered and at a disadvantage. Nayeli's mind raced, balancing caution and strategy. Finally, she decided they would use the terrain to create a trap, a narrow passage where the intruders could be funneled and controlled. Thomas followed her without question, trusting her instinct and judgment. He had learned much from her, not only about survival but about patience, observation, and the quiet strength that came from knowing one's environment. As they positioned themselves, Naeli whispered, "Remember what I taught you. Watch, wait, and act when the moment is right." We survived together. The intruders entered the narrow canyon, their movements deliberate but unaware of the hidden pair above. Naeli signaled Thomas to stay close, his eyes scanning the rocks and shadows for any sign of danger. She moved silently to a high ledge, positioning herself above the path. Her heart pounded, but her focus remained sharp. Every instinct, every lesson from years of living in the desert guided her. When the intruders reached the most confined part of the canyon, Naeli gave the signal. A small rockslide created a controlled noise and confusion, startling the men and causing them to hesitate. Thomas watched as Naeli's plan unfolded with precision. The intruders tried to regain their footing, but the canyon's narrow path restricted their movements, giving Naeli and Thomas the advantage. The desert itself seemed to work with them, every ridge and shadow contributing to their strategy. The confrontation was tense but brief. Naeli and Thomas managed to outmaneuver the intruders without unnecessary violence, forcing them to retreat and leave the canyon. The intruders disappeared into the distance, frustrated and defeated, unaware of the skill and preparation that had outwitted them. Naeli and Thomas allowed themselves a brief moment of relief, knowing the immediate danger had passed, but that the desert still demanded vigilance. As night fell, they settled near a sheltered alcove. Thomas tended a small fire, while Naeli kept watch, her eyes scanning the darkened canyon. The bond between them had grown stronger through the shared danger, trust, and reliance on one another. They had faced real threats, navigated the challenges of the desert, and survived together. There was a quiet understanding now, deeper than words, that their connection had become something rare and meaningful. In the quiet moments by the fire, Thomas spoke. "I've never met anyone like you," he said softly. "You've taught me more than I ever imagined I could learn in the desert." Naeli looked at him, her expression unreadable, yet her eyes reflected a depth of feeling she did not voice. "The desert teaches all who listen," she replied. "You have learned well because you were willing to see and to trust." Their companionship had grown into something more profound than survival alone. There were moments of quiet intimacy, small gestures and shared smiles that conveyed emotions neither dared to speak aloud. Each glance, each touch carried meaning, a bond that had been forged through danger, reliance, and shared experience. Yet both were aware that the world outside the canyon could not be ignored, and that their connection existed in a delicate balance of trust and caution. In the following days, Naeli guided Thomas further in understanding the desert. She taught him how to find hidden water sources, track animals, and anticipate changes in weather. He absorbed every lesson, growing stronger and more confident with each passing day. But alongside practical skills, there was also a deepening understanding of one another. They began to share stories of their pasts, the hopes, regrets, and dreams that had shaped them. Thomas spoke of life on the ranch, the hard work, and the challenges he had faced. Naeli shared the stories of her people, their traditions, and the lessons she had learned from generations who had survived in the harsh land. One evening, after a long day of movement and preparation, they rested on a rocky outcrop overlooking the canyon. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange, pink, and purple. Thomas turned to Naeli, his voice gentle. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want you by my side." Naeli felt a quiet warmth in her chest, the acknowledgement of a bond she had been aware of but had not yet allowed herself to fully name. She nodded slowly, her voice barely a whisper. "We survived together. That is our path." The next morning, they began a careful journey out of the canyon, moving through hidden paths that Nayeli had scouted over the years. Every step was deliberate, every decision informed by the knowledge and experience they had gained. The desert remained unpredictable, but together they were prepared. Their bond, forged through trust, danger, and shared survival, gave them strength and confidence that neither had experienced before. As they reached the edge of the canyon, the world beyond stretched out before them. Wide plains, distant towns, and the uncertain challenges of life outside the desert. Nayeli paused, looking back at the rocky cliffs, the hidden paths, and the place where they had survived together. This land had been both teacher and protector, shaping them in ways they could not yet fully understand. Thomas stood beside her, his hand brushing against hers in a silent acknowledgement of what they had endured and what they had become together. The journey beyond the canyon would be difficult. They would face new challenges, unknown dangers, and the realities of a world that had not always been kind to either of them. But they faced it with a bond forged in the crucible of survival, a bond that was stronger than fear, stronger than uncertainty, and stronger than the desert itself. In the days that followed, Nayeli and Thomas moved carefully through the plains, cautious but confident in their abilities and their connection. The lessons of the desert remained with them, guiding each step, each decision, and each interaction with the world around them. They knew that life beyond the canyon would test them in new ways, but they also knew that together, they could face whatever came. The story of the Apache woman and the wounded cowboy became one of resilience, courage, and trust. It was a story of survival in a harsh land, of human connection forged through adversity, and of the strength found in partnership. Nayeli and Thomas had begun as strangers brought together by circumstance, but they had become companions, allies, and, quietly, something more profound, a bond that would shape the rest of their lives. As the sun set over the distant plains, casting long shadows across the land, Nayeli and Thomas paused to rest. The desert had taught them many lessons: the importance of patience, the value of trust, and the power of observation. But most importantly, it had brought them together, showing them that even in the harshest conditions, human connection could thrive. They had survived, learned, and grown together, and the bond between them remained unbroken, a testament to courage, love, and the enduring spirit of survival.